There profoundly is, in the way that women behave in leadership and the way that men behave in leadership. So often the business owner would say to me, look, I don't actually feel like I'm the leader. I'm just one of the team. We all pitch in. We all do what needs to happen to look after the customer or to do whatever it is their mission was. It was about productivity. People are happier working surrounded by people they love, which was a pretty big deal, as anyone who's been through it will tell you, that it really makes you sit back and evaluate your life and where your life is going and, what you've been doing with it.
Welcome to Mission Activated, where we bring you the stories of individuals who've awakened to their true purpose and are living a life of passion, impact, and alignment. I'm Aveline Clarke, your host, and I believe that when you're on mission, everything falls into place. Here, we share the journeys of those who've discovered their unique path and embraced their soul's calling. It's not just about making money in life and in business, it's about making a difference, living on purpose, and inspiring yourself and others along the way. Let's get to it. Welcome to Mission Activated podcast. On today's show, I have the wonderful Ros Cardinal. Now, Ros is a workplace consultant from Australia, and she's also the author of a book called The Resilient Employee. She's a writer. She's so passionate about what she's here to do. She is on path. She is activated in her mission. She regularly contributes articles to online publications such as Leaders in Heels, the Huffington Post, and People Development magazine. In 2022, Ros was recognised with a World of Difference Award by the International Alliance for Women for the work she did in creating a women's leadership archetype model. And in this conversation, I'm going to ask Ros more about that, what it's designed to do, and what's the purpose for all of it. And one fun fact about her, she is a retired kickboxing instructor and martial artist. She won a women's open division in the State of All-Stars Martial Arts Comp in 2001. So she is not a woman to be messed with, but she's absolutely lovely. And she has a lot to say about the change that she wants to see in organisations. So enjoy my conversation with Ros Cardinal. Hello, here we are. Thank you so much for joining me, Ros. It is a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Really happy to be here.
I'm happy here too. I was just so excited when we connected and I learned more about your background, and I just thought, wow, you're going to be such a great guest for so many reasons. And I just want to give our audience a little bit of insight that you've already given me. You are an author of a book called The Resilient Employee, and in 2022, you were recognised with a World of Difference Award by the International Alliance for Women for the work you've done in creating the Women's Leadership Archetypes model. And you're also a retired kickboxing instructor and martial artist, which I absolutely loved. What a diversity in activity and interests.
Yes, it's been a bit of a journey.
Wonderful. Well, this podcast show is all about talking with, you're here to talk to me, but we're talking about your journey and what makes you inspired and on the mission that you're on. From the introduction, obviously, there's a lot to you, and I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into more about the work that you're doing now. But I'd love to start with where your journey began. So could you let us know, think back to where did the story or where did that journey begin? Imagine you're sitting under the tree in the 100-acre wood, you open up the book right at the very beginning. So what's that journey been that's brought you to where you are today?
Look, for me, it's there's been a few things, but I'll stick to the work journey to start off with. I started back in those days, what was called personnel in the Commonwealth Public Service. So the iteration before it was called human resources. And as a young woman going into the workforce, I remember talking to an older woman who's probably the age I am now. And I asked her about how long she'd been in the public service. And she told me it was the second time round because she had to resign when she got married and then rejoined, much later on when married women were allowed to rejoin the public service. And so for me, I think there was always something sitting there in the back of my mind about this why is it that the world of work is more challenging for women than it seems to be for men? And I certainly noticed as I went through my HR career that I often worked in places where all of the staff would be women and the senior person in the HR department was a man. And that certainly was the case through a lot of my career. So I think it sort of got me fairly early on thinking about that. And I went through the ranks fairly quickly. And I remember I had a woman working for me who was separated from her husband. It all just happened very recently. She had, I think, 5 children, separated from her husband, and she just found out she was pregnant with number 6. And, husband had sort of run off and left her. And she said to me when she was heading off on maternity leave, when it came around to the time, she said, look, I don't know what I'm going to do. I need to come back to work. But back in those days, it was, we're talking about the sort of late 1980s, it was actually really more common for women to quit work after they'd had kids. So there still wasn't a lot of women in the workplace that came and stayed. And if they did go back to work, it was after a reasonable career break. You kind of waited till your kids were in school before you went back to work. And so when she was due to come back, we had a chat and she said to me, look, I can't come back full time. I actually can't manage it. And we didn't have any part-time positions available for people coming back from maternity leave. It wasn't a thing back then. So I actually created the very first return to work maternity leave part-time position. And it was a pretty big battle to get it through because we went through all the arguments about it's not efficient for the organisation, blah, blah, blah. But we got it through. And that was something that I was really incredibly proud of. And looking back on it, I was like 19 years old and fighting for something that wasn't relevant to me at that stage. But I recognised how important it was for women to have flexibility and to be able to, do work the way that they need to do work in order to, I suppose, enable their personal life outside of work to be successful. And so I worked in pretty male-dominated areas through my career, and I ended up getting cancer in 2010, which was a pretty big deal, as anyone who's been through it will tell you, that it's really makes you sit back and evaluate your life and where your life is going and, what you've been doing with it. And you do get those horrible regret moments where you think, if this is it, I'm never going to do all the things I wanted to do, because we do put everything off. We can't, for example, my husband and I had always wanted to travel, and we didn't because it was too expensive. The kids were too young. The kids were in school. The kids were at university, all the reasons why we couldn't travel. And when I looked at it, I kind of went, if this is it for me, I never saw the world. Why have I never seen the world? And there was how can I take what I'm doing and expand it to more people? It's like I really felt like I needed to have a bigger impact in the world that I couldn't have just working in a corporate environment. So I got through my treatment, and part of the I guess the journey of recovery, because you get a lot of time to just sit around and think about things and watch a lot of Sex and the City reruns and things like that and read trashy books. But I really thought about what I wanted to be doing. And one of those things was obviously doing travel, but it was about how do I expand my impact? How do I help more people? How do I help more organizations be successful? And so in 2012, beginning of 2012, I took the big leap and left my corporate job and started my business. And that was where I really started to get, I suppose, much more serious about the question about women in leadership and women in business in general. And so it's the consulting side of it's been great. I love working with lots of different organizations on things like strategy and culture and leadership and team building and so on. But as I was coaching women leaders, it really kind of raised for me this issue of, what's the glass ceiling really all about? And I was finding that women were getting to the glass ceiling and looking through it and going, I actually don't want the world that lives on the other side of that glass ceiling. I don't want the 80-hour weeks. I don't want the on-call 24/7. I don't want the not being able to have a life. I actually want to be able to have a life and a family and all the things I want to do outside of work. And so a lot of women were exiting. They were not even bothering to try and crack the glass ceiling. They were just going off and doing something else. And the women who did get through, I was finding that there were women there who were really struggling. They were saying, look, this isn't what I signed up for. I had a client who ended up learning how to play golf because she said the executive team all play golf together on a Saturday. And if I'm not there, they make all these decisions because they talk about work while they're golfing, and they make all these decisions that they don't tell me about. I've kind of got to be there to have a say. And so she took up golf, and she didn't really like it that much, but she said, I've got to do what I've got to do to be successful in this organization. So it kind of led me to what's gone wrong? What's gone wrong with the world of work that we're, women are being expelled from the system. It's not like even they're looking at it and making decisions about, I don't want to do that. They're kind of actively getting out because they so don't want to do what's on the other side of the glass ceiling. And so in 2016, I actually started really working on it. And I got together a focus group of 538 women from around the world, which was fabulous. And they contributed surveys and research and interviews and all kinds of things. And it was all very low tech. I used to knock up Word documents and email it to people, and they'd email it back again, and I'd add it up by hand and, sit there with my pen and my calculator working out scores. And out of that came just the most amazing stories. I talked to women who were doing fabulous things in the business world. And something that became really obvious as I talked to them is that when you have women-owned and women-led businesses that don't have that sort of male hierarchical, structure of, one person at the top, it's, and as you go up the pyramid, there's fewer jobs. I found that women in those businesses, it was very organic. The leadership was very like a Venn diagram rather than a pyramid. And women worked together, and there wasn't a real sense of hierarchical leadership. So often the business owner would say to me, look, I don't actually feel like I'm the leader. I'm just one of the team. We all pitch in. We all do what needs to happen to look after the customer or to do whatever it is their mission was. And she, some of them even said, look, sometimes when there's a need, somebody else in the business steps up and they take a leadership role for a while because maybe we need to revamp our marketing systems, and we've got someone in the business who's a great marketer. They actually take the lead in the business while we do that. And then when we've stopped doing that, they kind of get reabsorbed. So it was a very different feel to the way, men and women do leadership. And I know it's kind of a bit un-PC to say that there is a difference, but there profoundly is in the way that women behave in leadership and the way that men behave in leadership. And the turning point for me was when I thought about how did all of this start, and went back to the Industrial Revolution, which is where the world of Western work started. And the women weren't there because we didn't go to work. We stayed home. And so we had this sort of massive shift from people working together in communities and villages and family groups into somebody leaving home, who was the man, to go to a place that was called work. And because women weren't there, we weren't represented at all. It was structured the way that men like to lead naturally. And then you bring women along, and look, to be fair, we haven't been in the system in any great numbers since really World War II. And certainly, like I said, women in the Commonwealth Public Service had to resign when they got married a generation before me. So we haven't been represented in big numbers in workplaces until fairly recently. And the system's just not designed for us. And that's the big challenge, is how do we change the world of work so that we come up with something which is designed to fit both, because both voices are valuable. We know from data that companies with equal representation of male and female at the executive level and on boards are more financially successful. We've got data that shows us that. So how do we change the system to make it so that both sets of voices are equally valued, and that it's a system that both males and females can flourish in?
There's a lot there, Ros, and what you're talking about is true to my heart. It's true to, I think, all the women that are listening to this who have had some kind of experience and understand firsthand what you're talking about. We get it. We do. We've seen it, or we've been there. We've either touched that glass ceiling, broken through it, or we've exited. And what I've seen also is a large number of women, especially over probably the last 10, 15 years. There's a massive number of women, and I believe statistically it's increasing, and I'm focused on Australia because I know I've looked at the information in Australia, who are leaving the workplace to set up their own business. And have you seen that? And
Yes.
Have you seen why that is?
Absolutely. I've seen women that I coach who come to me for exit coaching. It's usually not about finding another job in another business. It's like, how do I get out on my own and become a consultant, or how do I start a business doing something else? And I personally know a number of women who are running side gigs, getting ready to make the leap out of their corporate job. They're like, they're maybe studying, or they're setting up their business, getting ready for it. And that's to the detriment of businesses Australia-wide, the fact that talent is exiting to go and do something else just because the system isn't designed for them. And I really thought during COVID, I thought we were going to get there, because we suddenly went back to the way we used to do things, living and working with our families, around the kitchen table with the kids playing nearby, that kind of thing. And I remember I was doing some work with a company called the CEO Circle in Melbourne when COVID hit. And I was working for they had their sort of offshoot of it called the EA Circle, but I got access to the CEO Circle data. And the initial conversations in COVID were around, how's this going to work? How are we going to make sure people are doing the work when we can't see them? Are people just going to go home and be so absorbed by the COVID stuff they're not going to do anything? And the conversation shifted within a month into people are so incredibly productive. Like, are we burning them out? Do we need to make sure we stop them from working as much? And it wasn't necessarily about long working hours, although it could be. It was about productivity. People are happier working surrounded by, people they love. And even in things like, I had a client say to me, she saved 3 hours a day commute time in Sydney. And she said, I start work and I'm so much more relaxed and productive because I haven't done that hour and a half battle through the Sydney traffic to work. And she said, my working day just goes so much smoother because I haven't got that hang up of the stress involved with the commute time. So it was wonderful for lots and lots of people, but we've turned the corner the wrong way now. We've gone back to mandating, like the New South Wales government mandating return to work. It's a challenge. It really is, because we kind of almost got there and then we didn't.
Is there something that is happening or, behind the scenes in the wings that can help shift it again that you're aware of?
That's a really great question. It's one I've been pondering a lot. And one of the things about the work that I did is we created a model for women's leadership, which is, let's actually define what women's leadership looks like as distinctly different from male leadership. We've created assessment tools around it and so on, so women can now be benchmarked against other women leaders rather than benchmarked against the generic leadership pool, which is predominantly men. And women are loving the way that it helps them describe their leadership and helps them lead in a really, truly authentic way rather than trying to emulate the masculine leadership style, which doesn't work for women. And as we're finding more women stepping into that and finding their voice and finding the way of actually being an authentic, genuine leader, more people are starting to flock to that style of leadership. And we're actually seeing that shift, that people, certainly when you look at data around competencies, for example, when you look at how leadership is defined, good leadership is defined. When you say to people, think about the best leader you've ever worked for, what was that like? When they describe it, the characteristics of that are predominantly those feminine leadership characteristics. So I feel like there's a shift in the world around people recognizing that leadership should be about, people focus and compassion and generosity and vision and all those things that women tend to be really good at. It's not to say that male leadership doesn't work. Like, we need both. But I think there's starting to be a recognition that good leadership isn't the traditional style of leadership that we've experienced to date. Mm-hmm. And that's really encouraging.
Mm-hmm. You're obviously working with a number of organisations, and this model that you've talked about that you've also received an award for, how is that being received in the organisations, and what are you doing to get it into more organisations?
It's been really interesting, the question of how it's been received, because we've ran quite a big leadership program over a number of years, started during COVID actually, using the model. And we had quite mixed feedback from organisations. So some organisations, some of the things that have come out of it is we've had women get promoted. We've had women take on more leadership responsibility. We had a woman who achieved her dream of becoming a CEO before she was 30, that kind of thing. And some organisations have loved and supported that and said, we think it's amazing that our women are stepping up, taking a bigger role, having a voice, changing the way we do leadership. And other organisations have been a little bit annoyed with us about it. So we've had this sort of thing, I didn't think when I sent people on your program they were going to get promoted and leave. So I think it's about the maturity of the organisation and whether or not they're prepared to see women flourish and thrive. But certainly we've had lots of organisations really embracing it, which has been wonderful.
That's great. Do you see that the more organisations that use this, it's going to help the whole way that people feel about their work and willingness to actually turn up to the office, for instance, or do work in a more flexible way?
I do. And look, because it's early days yet, like it's, up until just recently, it's only been me. I only just recently started an accreditation program to accredit other women to use the tool with their work. So the ripple effect's going to flow out. But I've used the tool, like I did a leadership conference. I spoke at a leadership conference, and every woman who attended the conference went through the assessment tool. So we had I think there was about 75 or 80 women who did it. Might have been more than that. And they're going back to their organisations all excited about this, this thing that I've been learning about, and I want to do things differently. But they're bumping into that traditional, that's not the way we do things around here. So we need to get critical mass on this. And this is, for me, the next stage is how do we get critical mass on these conversations where there's enough people talking about it, and enough people standing up and going, we actually want to do this differently. We want to restructure our organisation so we design it differently so it works for women. And look, I remember years ago facilitating a leadership program, and we brought in one of the departmental secretaries to speak. And one of the women asked him a question. She said, look, what's a tip? Like, for those of us who aspire to becoming a departmental secretary or a deputy secretary one day, what advice have you got? And he said, get a wife. I've got one. They're awesome. And he said, no, seriously, my wife has done everything. She's looked after the home, looked after the kids, booked our holidays, paid our bills, done the shopping, organised my doctor's appointments. So I've been able to focus solely on my career. But you look at that and go, isn't that sad that this man's probably maybe not had the time with his kids he wanted to have? And yeah, sure, he's achieved the big salary and the accolades, but it's the system's messed up for everybody. It's not just women, but it's the critical mass, I think, that's going to be really, really important here.
Mm. It seems to me like you've capitalized on a really massive problem that we have, that many have noticed that we have, but you've created a solution, this tool, that's helping women to identify who they are. Would that be a way of describing it?
Absolutely. And look, the very first client I took through it back in 2016, it might have been a bit later than that, when the idea and the assessment tool was in its very, very early iterations. And I was coaching her around exiting the organisation she was in. And she said to me, look, I've been applying for jobs and I keep getting stuck. Every time they ask me to describe my leadership style, I kind of get stuck. Like, I don't know what to say. And she said, everything I think about saying either sounds too wishy-washy, so they're going to think, oh, she's just one of those sort of soft and fluffy women, or I sound like I'm too aggressive. And she said, I just haven't got it right. Can you help me with that? And I went, hang on a minute, I've got something for you. And I, grabbed it off my laptop, and we filled it out on the laptop and added up, again on my calculator. And when I showed her the results and she read through the descriptors, she said, that's it. That's my words. That's exactly what I need. This is what I'm going to put in my job applications. And every time I'm asked to talk about it, these are the words I'm going to use because it describes me so completely and beautifully. And for her, that was that big turning point where she went, now I've got the words. Now I know exactly what my leadership looks like. And it feels right to me. She said, she was almost like she lit up when she read it and went, this is it. This is the words.
It's almost like you're giving women a way for them to be more, stand up in their leadership and the roles that they've got, no matter what business or company, and they're more authentic. They can actually present as who they are rather than trying to wear a hat or a filter or, glasses that are not theirs.
Because when we think about leadership, and it's certainly been true for me in my career, certainly through a lot of my early career, my managers were all men. And that was the role model, was you looked at it and went, that's what leadership looks like. When you're at that sort of impressionable learning about how business works and things, you go, that's what leaders look like. That's how they behave, because that's what they obviously did to be successful. They're now the managing director or whatever because they behave like that. And when women try and wear that hat, it is inauthentic. And I certainly found that in my early leadership career, is that I did become too aggressive. I was bossy. I was pushy. I sort of, it was all about task. And, it was, looking back on it, I'm quite ashamed of how I behaved. It wasn't great. But I thought I was doing the right thing because that's what I saw above me, and it was working for the men. But when I did it, it just came across as too harsh.
If you're loving this conversation and want to dive deeper into purposeful work, then it's time to thank the 6-Star Leaders community for making this episode possible. The 6-Star Leaders are a group of purpose-driven business owners committed to doing business differently by embracing their unique genius and skills to make a real impact. It's a space for learning, growth, and truly becoming empowered in everything that you do. If you're ready to discover your own 6th star, go to bit.ly/6-star-community-intro and book a chat to learn more. We look forward to seeing you. Tell me, I want to step back and ask the more visionary question now, because there's obviously a bigger picture that you're trying to create. Yeah. So what's that bigger picture that our world can look like should we approach a far more flexible, balanced model of operating in our companies? You know, if I let women be women and men be men and accept both of them, what kind of world is that, and why do we need it?
It's a world where people are happier and fulfilled and more engaged. And you've probably heard about the studies that have been going on around the 4-day working week and finding that people love it. They're more productive, they're more engaged with their work, they're more committed to the company, they're more loyal because they're still doing the 5 days worth of work in 4 days and getting paid a full-time pay. And it's a world where people are valued and you're not looked down upon because you're working part-time, therefore you're less than. She's not important. She's only here 3 days a week, so we won't put her on that important project because she's not committed. We're not going to hear that kind of dialogue anymore. But, men and women are going to be happier for it. We're going to have more time to do the things we love. I talk to people all the time who are like, by the time I've done my, day of work, I get home, I've cooked dinner, maybe I went to the gym between work and home. I'm absolutely exhausted in the evening. I collapse on the couch and do nothing. And then on the weekend, I've got the washing and the lawn mowing and I've got no life. And that's what we need to change, is we need to get back to an integration where work and life are, equally valued, and you can get time to go to your doctor's appointment or see the kids at their school sports day and do that without the guilt of I'm taking time off work to do this. And like I said, people flourish when you let them do that and they're more productive. So you get better work from them anyway.
That's very true. What's the potential risk of this not being adopted into the future?
We're already seeing a huge amount of burnout in the workforce. I remember back, I used to work in workers' comp a long time ago, and it kind of back in those days, the key workers' comp things were back injuries and RSI. And now the biggest workers' compensation claims come from mental health. It's the biggest category these days. Everybody's struggling. Burnout is huge. People are exhausted. It's almost like we're killing people. And, it's no exaggeration. It really is. We're creating this toxic world that we live in where everything's driven by, the hustle culture, the work hard, and look, the younger generations aren't buying it anymore. Back when I started work, it was that thing of, I looked at my dad, you work really hard, you get to age 65, you've worked for the same company all your life, they give you a gold watch and off you go into the sunset with your pension. And we just don't have that anymore. It's the insecurity, the fact that people can't afford to buy houses anymore. They can't even afford to rent them, let alone buy a house. And we've just created this insecure, stressful world for people. So we've got to do something to unwind that.
You mentioned that the young people aren't buying it. What are you seeing the young people doing differently?
Look, a lot of them are doing the side hustle thing. There's a lot of young people who are like, my job is my job and it pays the bills, but maybe they're making candles on Etsy, or they're a yoga instructor, or they're, they're starting some kind of side hustle. And we know the gig economy is the future of work, but I really think we're going to see a lot of people running that, maybe even 2 or 3 side hustles where they consider it a hobby, but they get to the point where it's churning out enough money that they quit work.
Mm. It's really interesting, and I've seen that myself more and more. Do you think people are doing more of these things because it's what they love, or because it's what they have to do?
As in the side hustle?
Yeah.
A bit of both. I think there are people with the luxury of a well-paid job where they're secure enough that they're going, I'm doing this because I love doing it. Like I've been working with women who are coaching on the side. There's a lovely woman I'm working with who's training to be a yoga instructor and a meditation teacher, and she's bought a block of land out in the country and she's been building a retreat, which is going to be amazing when she gets that off the ground. So she's doing that for passion, but she's got the luxury of a high-paid job. Whereas there are other people who are doing the side hustle because they need the money. Mm. It's like, working a full-time job, but then my side hustle is detailing cars on the weekend. But I think that the younger generations are going to grow up with that as that's going to be their norm.
Yeah. Yeah. On your journey, has there been a mentor or someone who has helped you or that you've looked up to, that you've aspired to be like, or maybe has influenced the path that you've taken?
I wouldn't say there's specifically been one person. When I look back at my working life, I've worked for a couple of pretty amazing women, and they've been role models to me in terms of actually looking at leadership being done a bit differently. I had a wonderful, wonderful boss, a long time ago now, and she was one of the most supportive, caring, just kind people I'd ever met. And so she was a great leader because you wanted to work for her. You wanted to do your best for her because of who she was, just her natural, authentic style. And I often sort of reflect back on that when I think about that question of, the great leaders you've known in your life and what have they been like. And look, I've had some great male leaders too, but, there's been a couple of real standout women leaders who've really, I suppose, sparked that in me of, how do we do this differently? And, but other than that, it's sort of a collection of women leaders through all sort of facets of life, even clients of mine where I've worked with and gone, that's how you do leadership. That's great. Like the client I mentioned who, when we defined her leadership, she's like, that's me, and she's had this most amazing career. She's, when I was working with her to exit from the company she was in, she's gone on to, she was heading up became president of the society that she's a member of, and actually started, doing all this stuff overseas. Like she went to Paris to run a conference and then went to, I forget where, Morocco or somewhere like that. She's been all over the world with this society, and looking at that and going, she's doing it right. It's amazing.
That is really inspirational. It's like one of those, just the moments of validation that you get and the joy, those little, yes moments. Yeah, it's beautiful. I want to talk to you about purpose. I mean, you're obviously an extremely purposeful person. I mean, look at the mission that you're on and what you've created and the reasons why. How important is having a purpose to you?
It's the foundation of everything, because without purpose, you've got no reason to do anything. And my purpose is releasing true potential. And that's something I've known about myself for a long, long time now. And, purpose is what gets you out of bed in the morning. Purpose is what gets you pushing through when things are really tough. Purpose is what gets you going, even though this work isn't paying me right now, like the women's leader archetype work has, not pay, it's still running at a significant loss. But it's like, why do I keep doing it? Because it's important and because it's purpose driven and because the world needs this.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there a moment, or can you think of a moment in the journey, probably since you developed the archetype work, where you were shown through, a validation, events around you, where you just knew that you were on path? You went, yeah, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
I think there were a number of moments through the development of the tool, but it was when I got that first initial group of those 538 women. So what happened is I put a call out on LinkedIn back in 2016 and said, I'd like to talk to women in leadership roles, in business, their own business, community, whatever. I just want to talk to people. And people were spreading it out, like talking to other people. And we end up with, like I said, 538 women from right around the world who would put their hands up and said, I'm happy to be interviewed. I want to be part of a focus group. I'm happy to contribute to the research. And, I wasn't expecting anywhere near that. I was sort of expecting I might get 20 or 30 women, probably local women that I knew. And just it blew me away, the response to it. And that was I think that was the defining moment where I went, I think this is important. This is something I need to follow through. And that's what's kept me going, even when things have been challenging, is going, I actually need to honor those women that put that time and energy and effort into telling me their stories, doing interviews, sending me long emails. I've got, a filing cabinet full of, stacked about 3 feet high with just the emails that people have sent me. And, like I said, it was that recognition that other people thought this was important too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and what you mentioned before, like there are days when it's hard. We're human. We all have tough days, tough moments, and sometimes we forget. And having a purpose enables us to reconnect, doesn't it? And have you experienced those days where it's been tough? I mean, this is
Absolutely.
yeah.
And look, like I said, this isn't turning a profit yet. It's like my own side hustle off the side of the desk of my hustle, off my, because I've run a consulting business in my real working life. And look, I was looking at it just recently and realized I'd spent over 6 figures on the design and development and the IT and, all of the things. Because putting together a survey tool as far as IT is concerned is actually pretty costly, particularly multi-rater feedback. It's actually pretty complicated. And sometimes I look at that and go, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to have spent and a lot of time. It's been 8 years and I'm kind of sometimes I have had moments where I've gone, have I bitten off more than I can chew?
Mm.
And I've had moments of imposter syndrome where I've gone, who am I to be doing this? I'm just like this little leadership consultant in this tiny little state of Tasmania hanging off the end of Australia. It's like, who am I to start talking about this? But it's the purpose that brings me back. And again, like I said, honouring the stories of the women that I spoke to.
Mm. That's really beautiful. And just then I got a little flash of, you see sometimes on, I don't know, I guess movies or stories or even cartoons where there's a little idea that someone gets suddenly plopped into their mind and or an opportunity or something. And it might be something that we experience as well. And you can choose to run with it or you can just go, that's nice, and you let it go. And it sounds to me like you had this experience and there was this idea that came to you and you ran with it. You said, yeah, thanks, that's me. And who are you to do it? Well, you're the one that was gifted the opportunity. That's how I look at it anyway. You were gifted the opportunity, you saw it, and you said, yes, thanks. I'll do that. I'll take that on.
Yeah, I think it was Elizabeth Gilbert who writes about that idea. And she was talking about I think might have been her own book. She had an idea for a book and then somebody else published something about 5 years later. And she's like, they stole my idea. And she went, I didn't even talk about the idea to anybody. And she said that. She said that an idea gets given to you. Yeah. But if you don't do anything with it, that idea moves on to somebody who will do something with it.
Oh, I completely agree. It's happened to me. I know others, it's happened to them as well. So I see it's like this gift, and now that's your mission. And it's just beautiful. It's beautiful that you've got that, and it's your side hustle, but hopefully one day it'll be the hustle, because it'll be taking a life of its own and going out to a lot more companies for the right reasons.
And that was the reason for the accreditation program, because I realised that I, not only can I not do it all myself, but again, it's that expanding the impact. If it's just me, just working on it with the clients that I have, I work with it on, it's tiny and it needs to get out there. And in fact, one of the women who went through one of the very first cohorts of accreditation picked it up, and she almost immediately won a bid to deliver a women's leadership program in Bhutan. And she had women from 35 women from 7 different countries in that region come together for a leadership program. And the feedback was absolutely phenomenal. People said it was the best session they'd ever attended. And the arm of DFAT that funded it actually loved the feedback so much they engaged her to then do it with women in their organisation. So I looked at that and went, that's a reach I could never have got. Like, I don't know anyone in Bhutan. I don't know anyone in DFAT. There's no way I could have done that. And just to see Anu pick it up and just run with it like that, I was just, let's get the message out there. Let's start, spreading the word.
Absolutely. That's just beautiful. How impactful. See the impact you're making. And it's not, like you said, it's not you directly delivering that, but it's someone who's done your accreditation. And just imagine where you'll be in a year's time.
Yeah, it's exciting. And look, part of it for me was thinking about, I'm getting closer to retirement, and I did have that moment of, if I retire and it just all stops, and I really want to get this into the hands of more women so they can take it out and use it. So we create this big ripple effect across the world, and not just with women, but with male allies. So we can have the conversation, not just about how do we empower women to step up into authentic leadership, but how do we change the structures that we work within to make them more friendly, not just to women, but to people. It's people-friendly workplaces, not just about women. Yeah.
And who's this for? Just for people who are listening and they might be thinking, well, I'm a guy, I run a small business. This is not really going to impact me. But I just want you to share for our listeners, who needs to get hold of this and how can they? Because it feels to me like it's really important.
And look, I have had men who've, put all their women in their organisation through it. It's basically a diagnostic designed for women in leadership. The people who I'm accrediting are women, basically just because it's that sort of sense of lived experience.
Mm.
It's not to say that I won't accredit men in the future. It's just at this stage, it's women who are working with other women. Organisationally wise, there's a lot of organisations now doing women's leadership programs because they are starting to recognise that women need something different. But this isn't designed to be like, let's fix the women because they're broken. This is about how do we enhance women, give them a voice, give them the opportunity to stand out and be heard and to have an impact and to start to change the narrative. And as more women get into those leadership roles, things will change, but we need more women at the top. We don't want them bouncing off the glass ceiling and leaving.
No. What's the ultimate amazing outcome that could occur as a result of this diagnostic getting into organisations worldwide?
Look, again, I'd love to see workplaces becoming more human friendly, more human centric.
Mm.
It's for men's sake as well as women's sake. And this isn't a male versus female thing. Like I said earlier, it's like both voices are valued, both voices are important. We know from research that companies get better results when they've got equal representation at the top table. But it's about making workplaces better places to work for everybody, because other than a very small handful of people who love the status, nobody loves the 80-hour working week. Nobody loves that sort of on 24/7. They think they do, but they don't. And often it's not about the work. It's about, because I work really hard, I can afford to send my kids to private school and give them a great education. So instead of spending time with my children, I'm showing them how much I value them by paying for this, amazing education that'll give them a great start in life, which is great. But you look at it and go, but the cost of that, the 80-hour working week, the never seeing your kids, the traveling all the time, has that really been worth it?
Yeah, exactly. And I know men in leadership roles right now who are saying the same thing. And they're they're not signing up for the 80-hour working week. They're saying, actually, that's not serving anybody. And they're taking more of that, I guess, a more balanced perspective of their role as husband or father and, the leader in their organization. And I'm seeing a number of them now saying, no, that's not going to work for me.
Yeah, it's moving away from being solely profit driven. And I had a great conversation today actually with a client who was telling me about how they had done some work in her organization, and the consultant that was working with them put up a line on the whiteboard and basically put profit at one end and community focus at the other end, and then invited people to go and put a sticky note at which end of this continuum they thought the organization should be focusing on. And when this person told me the story, my first thought was, hang on, it's not an either or. Why have you made it into an either or? Why is this a continuum with one at either end? It's not. It is both. We can have both. And I think that's the mindset shift that we need, that it's, you can do both. You can do all of it. You don't have to do just the one thing. It's not a playoff between, having engaged, happy, fulfilled people versus making money. It's like you can actually do both.
I love that for so many reasons. And you say it so clearly. It's not about either or. And our whole society, I feel like we've just been so entrenched in this either or mindset culture. It's this, yes, no, either or. It's a comparative culture that we live in, and it's played out in so many ways in our lives and business decisions. And what you just said is really, really key. It can be both.
Yeah. And look, we see it in, history and in literature, that sort of trope of the starving artist, with this idea that if you follow your dreams, you're always going to be starving and living in an attic, I think was where the starving artist used to live, in an attic. So it's always been this idea that if you're following your dreams and your passion and you're doing something that brings you joy and something you love doing, you must be starving because, you're not doing the stuff that needs to be done to make money. And you can do both. You can absolutely do both.
You can. And over and over and over, it's been proven and shown. And look at what you're doing. Look at what I'm doing. And you don't have to be. The starving artist, I think, is almost a fear-mongering little, idea that takes us away from really tapping into who we are. And I love these conversations, and I love, that you've brought this up, because this is what I want to bring up in this podcast, in this show. It's talking to people who are on purpose. And I fully believe that when you're tapped into that, you can be yourself. You can do what you love, because that's often, when that's connected to purpose, then that's when you make your impact. That's when you create the most impact for others. And it's really exciting.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? That sort of idea that you can start with something really tiny and it grows and then it takes on a life of its own. And my hope is that this will be something that lives a long time beyond me. It's something that, I know, heading towards retirement, I want to see this, take off and be something that changes the world for men and for women, but, mainly for women, because they're the ones that are struggling in a system that just wasn't designed for us.
Couldn't agree more. And I hope that for you too, Ros. And I look forward to seeing how it continues to, go on its path to create the change that we need, because it is a systemic change that's needed. And I'm really honoured and grateful that you've taken up the opportunity and the challenge that was presented to you all those years ago, and you're on this journey. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great thought, isn't it, to sort of see the world different look, it won't be my daughter's lifetime, but maybe my grandchildren's lifetime, things will be different.
Yeah, but we've got to start, don't we?
We do. You've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, and it's starting with us. So we just want to honour you for that and say thank you and good on you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and if there's anything that I can do, like we've talked obviously outside of this this conversation, but I'm always here to support. So if there is something I can do or someone I can put you in contact with in the future, I'll definitely do that, because I really believe in what you're doing and know how important it is for all of us.
Thank you. I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah. So tell me, Ros, how can people get in contact with you?
So my email is probably the best way. So it's Ros, ROS, at shapingchange.com.au, all as one word. And if you want to find out about the Archetypes, it's just recently got its own home. I finally decided it needed a place of its own to live, so it's been separated off the Shaping Change website, and it's womensleaderarchetypes.com.au is where you'll find the Archetypes.
Fabulous. I'll definitely check that out, everyone. I know I will. It's really wonderful. And I love the name of your business too, Shaping Change, and that's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, that started a long time ago, actually. It was quite funny. It's one of those sort of universe type stories. I remember tossing up what the name was going to be, and I knew it had to be something to do with change, and I wanted creating change, but somebody had already got that one. So it was like, and one of the people I was working with at the time said, how about shaping? And I went, that's great, shaping change. And you know how the universe speaks sometimes. I don't normally read my horoscope, but for some reason, I can't remember, maybe I was in a dentist office or something, and I was flicking through a New Idea or one of those magazines and read my horoscope, and it said, this week you're going to be pushed into shaping change. I was like, that's so epic, isn't it?
I love it. Yeah. Those moments are just, gold.
Yeah. I tore the page out. So if I took it from a dentist practice, I'm really sorry. But I ripped out the page and took it home with me, and I've still got it somewhere.
I love it. Ros, in closing, I just want to ask, I always ask my guests, what words of wisdom or encouragement would you like to leave the listeners with?
Look, it's about getting back to being on purpose. It's figure out what your purpose is and live your life with it. You'll be happier. Your life, you live in flow if you're on purpose. You've got to figure out what it is and then live on purpose.
Thank you so much, Ros. Thank you for your wisdom. Thanks for all that you're doing. I really, really admire you and appreciate you. And thanks for being with me on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed our chat. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Mission Activated. If today's conversation resonated with you, please don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Remember, your mission matters. When you live on purpose, not only do you transform your own life, but you inspire others to do the same. Until next time, stay aligned, keep activated. I'll see you then.